The convent stood in a valley of silence, where the bells rang softly, and the air itself seemed to pray. Every stone, every corridor, every whispered psalm spoke of peace. Those who lived there believed with quiet certainty that this was a place where souls were formed for heaven, a refuge where no soul could truly be lost. Within those walls lived Saint Agnes, a woman known not for grand speeches or visible miracles, but for her humility. She moved gently, spoke little, and spent long hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. The sisters believed that her greatest gift was not what she said, but what she carried within her soul, a profound union with God and a rare grace, the ability to perceive the state of souls after death when heaven allowed. Among the sisters was a young nun whom everyone loved. She was obedient, kind, and unfailingly gentle. Her smile comforted the sick. Her silence never wounded. She followed the rule faithfully and never drew attention to herself. To the community, she was an image of quiet holiness, the kind that reassures others of their own goodness. When people spoke of her, they did so with confidence. "She is surely destined for heaven," they said. No soul so loved could be rejected by God. Even Saint Agnes admired her, though something within her remained still, watchful, listening. In the human heart, love often becomes a measure of salvation. We assume that admiration equals purity, that approval reflects divine favor. Surely someone so loved by everyone must be loved by heaven as well. But heaven does not judge as humans judge. Heaven sees what is hidden. Heaven weighs what is concealed in silence. And the question that would soon shatter the peace of that convent was this: but what if heaven sees what humans overlook? Before this story continues, we invite you to pause for just a moment. If there is a soul you wish to pray for, a loved one, a forgotten priest, a victim of war, or someone who died without comfort, please write their name in the comments below. We will personally offer Mass intentions for these souls, and we ask you to unite your prayer with ours. Let this story not only be heard, but become a prayer for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The convent stood in a valley of silence, where the bells rang softly, and the air itself seemed to pray. Every stone, every corridor, every whispered psalm spoke of peace. Those who lived there believed with quiet certainty that this was a place where souls were formed for heaven, a refuge where no soul could truly be lost. Within those walls lived Saint Agnes, a woman known not for grand speeches or visible miracles, but for her humility. She moved gently, spoke little, and spent long hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. The sisters believed that her greatest gift was not what she said, but what she carried within her soul, a profound union with God and a rare grace, the ability to perceive the state of souls after death when heaven allowed. Among the sisters was a young nun whom everyone loved. She was obedient, kind, and unfailingly gentle. Her smile comforted the sick. Her silence never wounded. She followed the rule faithfully and never drew attention to herself. To the community, she was an image of quiet holiness, the kind that reassures others of their own goodness. When people spoke of her, they did so with confidence. "She is surely destined for heaven," they said. No soul so loved could be rejected by God. Even Saint Agnes admired her, though something within her remained still, watchful, listening. In the human heart, love often becomes a measure of salvation. We assume that admiration equals purity, that approval reflects divine favor. Surely someone so loved by everyone must be loved by heaven as well. But heaven does not judge as humans judge. Heaven sees what is hidden. Heaven weighs what is concealed in silence. And the question that would soon shatter the peace of that convent was this: but what if heaven sees what humans overlook? Before this story continues, we invite you to pause for just a moment. If there is a soul you wish to pray for, a loved one, a forgotten priest, a victim of war, or someone who died without comfort, please write their name in the comments below. We will personally offer mass intentions for these souls, and we ask you to unite your prayer with ours. Let this story not only be heard, but become a prayer for those who can no longer speak for themselves. That night, the convent returned to its familiar stillness. The candles were extinguished one by one. Footsteps faded from the corridors. Doors closed softly, and the silence of the valley settled once more around the walls. For most of the sisters, sleep came easily, comforted by the belief that one of their own now rested in eternal peace. But Saint Agnes did not sleep. She knelt alone in the chapel long after Compline had ended. The sanctuary lamp cast a faint glow upon the altar, barely illuminating her bowed head and folded hands. Her lips moved in prayer, but her heart felt unusually heavy. There was no vision, no voice broke the silence, no image formed before her eyes. Heaven remained closed, offering neither consolation nor warning. And yet, something within her would not rest. It was not fear. She had known fear before. It was not doubt. Her faith remained firm. It was a weight, quiet and persistent, pressing gently upon her soul. As she prayed, a single question returned again and again, uninvited yet impossible to dismiss. She tried to push it away with familiar prayers, with psalms she had recited 1,000 times. Still it returned, softer each time, but no less insistent. Was peace at death always a sign of salvation? Could love from others conceal something unseen? Saint Agnes lowered her head further, her forehead nearly touching the cold stone floor. She searched her conscience, wondering if the unease came from her own weakness, her own imperfection. But deep within her prayer, the question finally took shape and rose to her lips, not as an accusation, but as a plea. Lord, is every soul we love already saved? The words hung in the silence, unanswered. She waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The chapel remained still. The lamp flickered gently, as if breathing. No response came from heaven, yet the weight in her heart did not lift. At last, near dawn, Saint Agnes rose slowly to her feet. She made the sign of the cross and whispered an act of trust, surrendering the question to God. Still, as she left the chapel and the first pale light of morning touched the windows, she sensed that the silence itself was a preparation, that heaven was not ignoring her prayer, but delaying its answer. And when the answer came, it would not bring peace. The answer came when Saint Agnes least expected it. It was not during the night, nor in the depths of exhausted prayer. It came as she knelt once more in the chapel the following day, her hands resting calmly upon her knees, her soul surrendered in quiet trust. Suddenly, the air around her changed. The walls of the chapel seemed to recede, not vanishing, but fading into something deeper, heavier. Light remained, yet it was no longer gentle. It burned without consuming, illuminating a place that was neither darkness nor glory. Saint Agnes understood at once. This was not hell. There was no hatred here, no despair, no curse against God. The suffering she perceived was intense, but it was suffering that waited, suffering that hoped. It was a place of purification, not of condemnation. Nor was it heaven. There were no choirs of angels, no radiance of perfect joy, no overwhelming peace. The light revealed pain, a pain accepted, endured, and offered. Before her stood a soul, surrounded by flames that did not destroy the form they embraced. Each movement seemed heavy, each moment prolonged beyond measure, and yet within the fire there was submission. Then Saint Agnes heard a voice. It was weak, strained, yet unmistakably familiar. At first she thought it was memory playing tricks upon her mind, an echo of grief, a creation of compassion. But as the voice spoke again, her heart tightened. She knew this voice. It was the same gentle tone that once comforted the sick, the same quiet humility she had heard in the convent corridors. The realization struck her with sudden force. The soul before her was the young nun who had died in peace. Agnes felt her breath catch. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together, overwhelmed by the truth unfolding before her eyes. The soul lifted its gaze, not in accusation, not in despair, but in pleading humility. And from within the purifying fire came the words that pierced Saint Agnes's heart. "Do not forget me." The voice did not demand rescue. It did not question God's justice. It asked only to be remembered. In that moment, Saint Agnes understood something that would change her forever. A soul could be loved on earth, die in peace, and yet still burn, not abandoned by God, but unfinished. The vision faded as quietly as it had come. The chapel returned. The altar stood before her once more. But Saint Agnes remained kneeling, tears forming in her eyes, knowing that heaven had finally answered her question, and that the truth was far more demanding than comfort. Saint Agnes remained motionless, her body still kneeling in the chapel, her soul trembling between heaven and earth. The image of the suffering soul had not faded from her heart. Though the vision itself had withdrawn, its weight pressed heavily upon her spirit. Gathering her courage, she lifted her eyes once more in prayer, not demanding, but asking with reverent fear. "How long must you suffer here?" she whispered. For a moment there was silence. Then the veil parted again, not fully, but enough for the answer to reach her, not as a vision alone, but as a truth impressed upon her soul. 700 years. The words struck Saint Agnes with a force she had never known. Her breath caught, and her hands clenched instinctively against her chest. She felt her body tremble, not from disbelief, but from the sudden awareness of divine justice. 700 years. Not days, not decades, not even a single lifetime measured by human sorrow. Centuries of purification. Her heart rebelled at once. How could this be? This soul had been obedient, gentle, admired by all. She had lived within the walls of a holy convent, prayed daily, and died without fear. There had been no public scandal, no visible fall, no betrayal of vows known to any living soul. As if responding to the unspoken protest in Agnes's heart, understanding was granted. This was not punishment for a public mortal sin. It was not the consequence of abandoning the faith. It was not rebellion against God's law in the eyes of the world. It was the cost of a single sin, hidden, concealed, and never fully surrendered. The soul had carried it quietly, shielding it beneath a life of apparent holiness. To preserve peace, to protect reputation, to avoid judgment, the truth had been veiled. Confession had been incomplete. Sorrow had been restrained. What should have been brought into the light had remained buried in silence. Before God, nothing remains hidden. Saint Agnes understood now that divine justice does not measure by appearances, but by truth. The soul had not been condemned. Heaven still awaited her. But every deception, every withheld surrender demanded purification. The flames she saw were not flames of hatred, they were flames of truth. They burned away what love on earth had excused. They purified what admiration had overlooked. As the realization settled within her, Saint Agnes bowed her head, overwhelmed not by fear alone, but by awe. If such suffering awaited a soul so loved and admired, how few truly understood the weight of a single hidden sin. And in the silence that followed, one truth echoed clearly within her. God forgives freely, but He purifies completely.
When the veil was lifted once more, the soul did not flee from the truth. There was no attempt to defend itself, no effort to lessen the weight of what had been concealed. The flames surrounding her seemed to intensify, not in cruelty, but in clarity, as if the fire itself demanded honesty. "What was the sin?" Saint Agnes asked softly, her voice trembling with reverence rather than accusation. The soul hesitated, not from pride, but from the lingering shame that purification had not yet erased. To humans, the soul confessed, it seemed small. It was not a crime that shocked the world. It was not a scandal whispered through the convent halls. No rule had been publicly broken. No vow had been visibly shattered. But before God, it was heavy. The sin had begun quietly, a failure within a vow, serious in its root, yet carefully hidden beneath outward obedience. When conscience stirred, fear followed. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing trust, fear of shattering the image of holiness that others had already placed upon her. Silence became a refuge. The soul chose not to reveal the full truth. Confession was made, but not completely. Words were measured, details were withheld. The appearance of repentance was preserved, while the deepest wound remained covered. "I wanted peace," the soul said, "but I wanted it on my terms." Saint Agnes felt her heart tighten. She knew this temptation well, the desire to be forgiven without being exposed, to be healed without being seen. The soul continued, its voice quieter now. "I told myself it was better this way. No one would be scandalized. The community would remain united. I would do penance in secret." But secret penance cannot replace surrendered truth. The sin itself was not what bound the soul to such long purification. It was the choice to protect reputation rather than offer everything to God. It was the decision to remain partially hidden before the one who sees all. "I confessed," the soul said, "but I did not abandon myself fully. I feared the shame more than the fire." In that moment, the depth of the soul's suffering became clear. The flames were not punishing a past act alone. They were purifying a heart that had learned too late the cost of withholding truth. Holiness, Saint Agnes understood, is not measured by how little one falls, but by how completely one rises, exposed, humbled, and surrendered. The vision slowly withdrew, leaving Saint Agnes once more in the quiet chapel. But the confession echoed within her, louder than any accusation, a warning written not in fire, but in mercy. Nothing offered halfway remains unpurified.
As Saint Agnes remained in prayer, the pieces of the mystery began to align with painful clarity. On earth, the young nun had been loved without reserve. The community praised her obedience, her gentleness, her constant availability. She never argued, never drew attention, never disturbed the peace of the convent. Her silence was interpreted as humility. Her restraint was mistaken for perfection. In the eyes of the sisters, she had done everything right. Human judgment, Saint Agnes realized, measures holiness by what is visible. We admire consistency, kindness, and outward fidelity. We feel reassured by those who fit our image of sanctity, and we often reward them with affection and trust. But God does not judge by appearance. He weighs intention. He measures truth. He examines what is hidden beneath virtue. What the convent had loved was real, but it was incomplete. The young nun had truly desired God. She had sincerely sought holiness, yet within her heart remained a place she had refused to open fully, a truth she had chosen to protect rather than surrender. Heaven had not rejected her love. Heaven had simply refused to accept it halfway. Saint Agnes understood now why admiration on earth had not spared the soul from purification. Praise had strengthened what was good, but it had also concealed what was unresolved. The more she was admired, the harder it became to admit weakness. The more she was trusted, the more terrifying honesty seemed. The convent had weighed her by harmony. God weighed her by truth. The convent saw obedience. God saw hesitation. The convent saw peace. God saw fear. And yet there was no cruelty in God's judgment, only precision. Saint Agnes felt a quiet awe settle within her. She realized that divine justice is not opposed to mercy. It is the path through which mercy becomes complete. Nothing false can enter heaven, not because God is harsh, but because heaven is truth itself. The words formed clearly within her heart, not as condemnation, but as revelation. Holiness admired is not holiness complete. True holiness is not the absence of visible faults, but the courage to stand exposed before God. It is not the ability to maintain an image, but the willingness to lose it. Heaven does not ask to be impressed, it asks to be trusted. As Saint Agnes lowered her head, she understood that this vision was not given to condemn a soul already on the path to heaven, but to warn the living. What humans love may still need purification. What humans praise may still hide fear. And only truth, offered without reserve, can pass the final weight of heaven. When the vision withdrew, Saint Agnes did not rise in peace. She wept, not with the helpless sorrow of one who has lost hope, but with the piercing grief of a soul awakened to responsibility. Tears fell silently onto the stone floor of the chapel as she realized what heaven had entrusted to her, not merely knowledge, but a call to act. She understood at once what must be done. From that day forward, Saint Agnes embraced penance with renewed intensity. She fasted beyond what was required, offering the hunger of her body for the purification of another soul. Meals were reduced, comforts set aside, and sleep surrendered whenever prayer demanded more. She requested masses to be offered, not publicly, not for recognition, but quietly, intentionally, with each intention directed toward the suffering soul she had seen in fire. Every Eucharist became an act of intercession, every consecration a plea for mercy. Her prayers multiplied. By day, she carried the memory of the vision within her heart. By night, she knelt again before the altar, whispering psalms, litanies, and acts of surrender. She prayed not only with words, but with endurance, allowing her own suffering to unite with the pain she could not remove, but could share. In time, the veil was lifted once more. The soul appeared again, still surrounded by purifying fire, still burdened by pain, yet changed. There was no joy yet, but there was relief. No freedom yet, but there was gratitude. "Your prayers shorten my time," the soul said, its voice steadier than before. Saint Agnes felt both consolation and humility. She knew that the suffering was not erased, but she also understood something profound. Heaven allows the living to participate in the work of mercy. She was shown that time in purgatory is not measured as it is on earth. There are no hours or seasons, no sunrise or sunset. What is called years is a human expression for depth, intensity, and duration of purification beyond earthly measure. Yet the pain is real, the longing is real, the purification is real. Each prayer offered on earth truly reaches those flames. Each sacrifice truly lessens the weight borne by the soul. Nothing given in love is wasted. Saint Agnes rose from prayer with her eyes swollen from tears, but her will strengthened. She would not stop, not until heaven declared the work complete. For the first time, she fully understood the terrifying mercy of God, a mercy so perfect that it invites human cooperation, and a justice so loving that suffering can be redeemed by love. At this point, the story no longer belongs only to Saint Agnes. It turns toward us. What was revealed to her was not meant to remain a private vision, but a warning written in mercy. The suffering of that soul was not extraordinary because of great crimes, but because of a single truth many choose to avoid: a hidden sin. Not the kind that shocks others, but the kind that hides behind respectability, the kind that survives beneath good works, faithful routines, and public devotion, the kind we excuse because it does not disturb peace, only conscience. The soul Saint Agnes saw did not fall because she loved God too little, but because she loved her image too much. Incomplete confession is not silence, it is distortion. It allows the words of repentance to be spoken while withholding the heart. Fear replaces trust, appearance replaces surrender. How many carry such fear? Fear of being judged, fear of losing respect, fear of shattering the role others expect us to play. So we confess carefully. We soften the truth, we hide the depth of the wound, and we tell ourselves that God understands. He does, but understanding does not remove the need for purification. God forgives freely, but forgiveness does not erase what has not been surrendered. What is concealed cannot be healed. What is protected cannot be purified. Saint Agnes's vision reveals a reality few wish to face. Holiness delayed becomes suffering prolonged, not because God is harsh, but because truth cannot be rushed. The soul in the fire had already chosen heaven. Salvation was certain, but the cost of delay was measured not in days, but in centuries of longing. Let the weight of this truth settle. A secret sin can cost centuries, not because God delights in suffering, but because every fragment of pride must be burned away before love can be complete. This chapter of the story is an invitation, not a threat, an invitation to honesty, to courage, to confession that risks humiliation for the sake of freedom. For what is revealed on earth can be healed on earth, and what is healed here will not need fire there.
This warning is not reserved for cloisters and convent walls.
It reaches far beyond the life of one nun and touches all who have drawn close to the sacred, priests, religious, and faithful who have lived many years near the altar. Those who pray daily, serve faithfully, and are trusted by others must listen with particular attention. For proximity to holiness does not lessen responsibility, it increases it. The priest who celebrates the Eucharist, who hears confessions, who stands between heaven and earth on behalf of souls, is not shielded by purification by his office. The religious who has vowed obedience and poverty is not spared by the habit she wears. The long-practicing believer is not excused by years of devotion. Grace illuminates, and illumination reveals. The closer one lives to the altar, the more clearly God sees the heart. Routine prayer can become a refuge from honesty. Familiarity with sacred things can dull the urgency of conversion. What once burned with sincerity may slowly be replaced by careful correctness. Saint Agnes's vision exposes a dangerous illusion that serving God publicly guarantees interior surrender. It does not. What remains hidden in those closest to the sacred weighs heavier, not lighter. Not because God demands more than we can give, but because He has already given more than we deserve. A priest may preach repentance while quietly avoiding it. A religious may guard discipline while concealing fear. A faithful soul may appear unwavering while withholding truth. These are not accusations, they are invitations. The vision was not meant to condemn those who serve, but to awaken them. Holiness near the altar must be deeper, not safer. Confession must be more honest, not more careful. Surrender must be total, not rehearsed. The truth St. Agnes learned echoes with sobering clarity. The closer one lives to the altar, the heavier the responsibility. God is not impressed by our roles, He is transformed by our truth. And for those who stand closest to His mysteries, there is no greater protection than humility laid bare, before the altar, before confession, and before the consuming fire of divine love that desires to purify, not destroy.
In the final vision granted to Saint Agnes, the soul appeared once more. The fire still surrounded her. The purification was not yet complete. The pain remained real, a burning that could not be escaped, only endured. And yet, something had changed. There was hope. No longer the strained pleading of the first encounter, but a quiet endurance marked by trust. The soul no longer asked why she suffered. She accepted the fire as the final passage toward truth. Her gaze was lifted, not toward the flames, but beyond them, toward a heaven she now desired without reservation. Saint Agnes understood that this was not despair. This was mercy at work. The soul was not abandoned. She was being prepared. Every prayer, every Mass, every sacrifice offered on earth continued to lessen the weight she bore. The suffering had a limit, and that limit was love made complete. The vision faded, but its call remained. It was no longer directed only to one soul in purgatory, but to all who still walk the earth. The lesson was not complicated, but it was demanding. Examine your conscience, not quickly, not defensively, but truthfully. Confess not what is convenient, but what is real. Surrender not what is visible, but what is hidden. And do not forget those who can no longer help themselves. Pray for the souls in purgatory. Offer masses. Speak their names. Their silence is not absence. Their suffering is not forgotten. Heaven listens when the living remember. Saint Agnes's vision leaves us with a truth that cuts through comfort and illusion alike. Being loved by everyone is not the same as being fully surrendered to God. Human love can admire, excuse, and overlook. Divine love purifies, completes, and transforms. Let us not use affection as a shield against truth. Let us not mistake approval for holiness. May we choose humility now, while confession is still available, while fire can be avoided. For the love that saves is not the love that applauds, it is the love that consumes everything, until nothing remains but God. As this story draws to a close, we return to you, the one listening, watching, and carrying your own silent intentions. Saint Agnes's vision does not end in fear, but in responsibility. It invites us to become participants in mercy, not spectators of mystery. The souls in purgatory do not ask for explanations, they ask for prayers. They wait, they endure, and they hope. Many of them are forgotten. There are souls for whom no one lights a candle anymore, souls whose names are no longer spoken aloud, souls who died without comfort, without farewell, without anyone to remember them at the altar of God. And yet, not one of them is forgotten by heaven. If you have followed this story, it is not by chance. Take this moment to pray, not hurriedly, not distracted, but with intention. Offer a single prayer. Whisper a single name. Even if you do not know who needs it most, God knows where to send it. Pray for parents and grandparents whose graves are rarely visited. Pray for priests who served quietly and died unseen. Pray for victims of war, abandonment, and sudden death. Pray for souls who never knew how to ask for prayer themselves. Every prayer matters. Every Mass offered reaches farther than we can see. Every act of love shortens a waiting we cannot measure. Let this story remain with you not as entertainment, but as intercession. Let it shape your confession, your prayer, and your remembrance of the dead. And as we leave this moment of silence together, let the final truth echo gently in your heart. If even the most loved among us must be purified, how much more do the forgotten need our prayers? May our love not end with words, but continue where voices can no longer speak. Amen.